Okay, well, it looks like this should be good. Ah, hello, Moony Neptune. Thank you so much for popping in. And how is everything sounding for all of you? I'm just trying to get a few things set up more properly before we begin. Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming in today. So, for today, we will be continuing reading the book A Treasury of Irish Fairy and Folk Tales. Just a little reminder that on Halloween, I will be having my Live 2D VTuber debut. So I do hope that everyone will be able to join us for that wonderful day. It's getting a lot closer. Won't lie that I'm getting a little nervous. And so, we shall begin. The first chapter for today is Popular Notions Considering the City Race, attributed to Lady Wilde. From the earliest ages, the world has believed in the existence of a race midway between the angel and man, gifted with power to exercise a strange, mysterious influence over human destiny. The Persians called this mystic race Paris, Ares. The Egyptians and the Greeks named them demons, not as evil, but as mysterious allies of man, invisible though ever present, capable of kind acts, but implacable if offended. The Irish called them the Sidhe, or spirit race, or the Treasury, a modification of the word fairy. Their country is Tirnanog, the land of perpetual youth, where they live in a life of joy and beauty, never knowing disease or death, which is not to come on them till the judgment day. Where they are fated to pass into annihilation, to perish utterly and be seen no more. They can assume any form, and they make horses out of bits of straw, on which they ride over the country and to Scotland and back. They have no religion, but a great dread of the scapular, Latin words from the Gospels written by a priest and hung round the neck. Their power is great over unbaptized children, and such generally grow up evil and have the evil eye, and bring ill luck, unless the name of God is instantly invoked when they look at any one fixedly and in silence. All over Ireland, the fairies have the reputation of being very beautiful, with long yellow hair sweeping the ground in lithe, light forms. And they love milk and honey, and sip the nectar from the cups of the flowers, which is their fairy wine. I do love milk and honey. Underneath the lakes, and deep down in the hearts of the hills, they have their fairy palaces of pearl and gold, where they live in splendor and luxury, with music and song and dancing and laughter, and all joyous things as befits the gods of the earth. If our eyes were touched by a fairy salve, we could see them dancing on the hill in the moonlight. They are served on vessels of gold, and each fairy chief, to mark his rank, wears a circlet of gold round his head. The Sidhe race were once angels in heaven, but were cast out as a punishment for their pride. Oh, hello, Mal. Thank you so much for joining me today. How does everything sound to you so far? Some fell to earth, others were cast into the sea, while many were seized by demons and carried down to hell. Very soft and relaxing. Then it is quite perfect, my dear. carried down to hell, whence they issue as evil spirits to tempt men to destruction under various disguises, chiefly, however, as beautiful young maidens, endowed with the power of song and gifted with the most enchanting wiles. Under the influence of these beautiful sirens, a man will commit any and every crime. Then, when his soul is utterly black, they carry him down to hell, where he remains forever tortured by the demons to whom he sold himself. Well, thank you, Mel. I'm happy that you're here with me. I hope that I can bring you some relaxation on this fine day. The fairies are very numerous, more numerous than the human race. In their palaces underneath the hills, and in the lakes and the sea they hide away much treasure. All the treasure of wrecked ships is theirs, and all the gold that men have hidden and buried in the earth when danger was on them, and then died and left no sign of their place to their descendants, and all of the gold of the mine and the jewels of the rocks belonging to him. And in the Sifra, or fairy house, the walls are silver, and the pavement is gold, and the banquet hall is lit by the glitter of the diamonds that stud the rocks. If you walk 9 times round a fairy wraith at the full of the moon, you will find the entrance into the Sifra. If you enter, beware of eating the fairy food or drinking the fairy wine. The city will, indeed, wile and draw many a young man into the fairy dance. The fairy women are beautiful, so beautiful that a man's eyes grow dazzled who looks on them. With their long hair floating like the ripe golden corn, and their robes of silver gossamer, they have perfect forms, and their dancing is beyond all expression graceful. But if a man is tempted to kiss a Sighogi, or young fairy spirit, in the dance, he is lost forever. The madness of love will fall on him, and he will never again be able to return to the earth or to leave the enchanted fairy palace. He is dead to his kindred and race forevermore. On Fridays, the fairies have special power over all things, and chiefly on that day, they select and carry off the young mortal girls as brides for the fairy chiefs. But after 7 years, when the girls grow old and ugly, they send them back to their kindred, giving them, however, as compensation, a knowledge of herbs and phyltures and secret spells, by which they can kill or cure, and have power over men both for good and evil. It is in this way the wise women and fairy doctors have acquired their knowledge of the mysteries and the magic of herbs. But the fairies do not always keep the mortal women in a 7 years' bondage. Sometimes they only take away young girls for a dance in the moonlight, and then leave them back in their own home, lulled to a sweet sleep. But the vision of night was so beautiful that the young girls longed to dream again and be made happy with the soft enchantment of the music and dance. The fairies are passionately fond of music. It is therefore dangerous for a young girl to sing when she is all alone by the lake, for the spirits will draw her down to them to sing to them in the fairy palace under the waves, and her people will see her no more. Yet sometimes, when the moonlight is on the water and the waves break against the crystal columns of the fairy palace far down in the depths, they can hear her voice, and they know that she is singing to the fairies in the spirit land beneath the waters of the lake. There was a girl in one of the villages that could see things no one else saw, and hear music no one else heard, for the fairies loved her and used to carry her away by the night in a dream to dance with the fairy chiefs and princes. But, above all, she was loved by Finvara, the king, and used to dance with him all night till sunrise through her form seemed to be lying asleep on the bed. One day, she told some of her young companions that she was going that night to a great fairy dance on the Rath, and if they chose, she would bring them and put a salve on their eyes so that they would see wonders. The young girls went with her, and on coming to the Rath she said, "Now put your foot on my foot and look over my left shoulder, and you will see the king and queen and all the beautiful lords and ladies with gold bands round their heads dancing on the grass. But take care when you see them to make no sign of the cross, nor speak the name of God, or they will vanish away, and, perhaps, even your life will be in danger." On hearing this, the girls ran away in fear and terror, without ever using the spell or seeing the fairies. But one remained, and told her friends the next day that she had danced all night to the fairy music, and had heard the sweetest singing, so that she longed to go back and live forever with the spirits on the hill. And her wish was granted, for she died soon after, and on the night of her death, soft music was heard floating round the house, though no one was visible. It was also said that the beautiful flowers grew on her grave, though no hand planted them there, and shadowy forms used to gather in the moonlight and sing a slow chant over the place where she was laid. The fairies can assume all forms when they have special ends in view, such as to carry off a handsome girl to fairyland. For this purpose, they sometimes appear at the village festivals as tall, dark, noble-looking gentlemen, and they while away the young girls as partners in the dance by their grand air and the grace of their dancing. And ever after the young girl who had danced with them moves and dances with a special fairy grace, though sometimes she pines away and seems to die. But everyone knows that her soul has been carried off to Tirna Dog, where she will be made the bride of the fairy king and live in luxury and splendor evermore. Oh, thank you so much for the bits, Looney Neptune. Yet, though the fairies are fond of pleasure, they are temperate in their mode of living, and are, besides, honest in their dealings and faithful to their promises. If they borrow wine from the gentry, they always repay it in blessings, and never indulge much in eating or drinking. But they have no objection to offer the mortals a subtle red wine at the fairy banquets, which lulls the soul to sleep and makes the reason powerless. The young men that they beguile into the fairy palaces become their bond slaves and are set to hard tasks. One man said he had marched with Fivara's men all the way from Mayo to Cork, but there they had to leave him, as they were going to Spain and could not take him across the sea on their white horses. They also much desire the aid of powerful mortal hen to assist them in their fairy wars, for they have often disputes and battles amongst themselves for the possession of some coveted rath or dancing ground. Once a fairy prince came to a great chieftain of Connaught, one of the Kirwans, and begged for aid against a hostile fairy tribe that had invaded his territories. The required aid being given, the fairies and their mortal auxiliaries plunged into the lake and fought the enemy and conquered, after which the Connaught men returned to shore laden with rich presents of silver and gold and crystal wine cups as the expression of gratitude from the fairy prince. It is said that Kirwan of Castle Hackett, the great Connaught chief, also received a beautiful fairy bride on the occasion, and it is certain that all the female descendants of the family are noted for their beauty, their grace in dancing, and their sweet voices while speaking. Lady Cloncurry, mother of the present Lord Cloncurry, was of this race, and in her youth was acknowledged leading beauty of the Irish court, and celebrated for the rare fascination of her manner and voice. This next chapter is called The Hurling Match, with no attributations affiliated to it. The fairies, with their true artistic love of all the gentle graces of life, greatly dislike coarse and violent jesters, and all athletic sports, such as hurling and wrestling, and they often try to put an end to them by some evil turn. One day a great cloud of dust came along the road during a hurling match and stopped the game. On this the people grew alarmed, for they said the fairies were out hunting and will do us harm by blinding us. And thousands of the city swept by, raising a terrific dust, though no mortal eye could see them. Then one man, a good player and musician, ran for his fiddle and began to play some vigorous dance tunes. "For now," said he, "the fairies will begin to dance and forget us, and they will be off in no time to hold a revel on the rath to the music of their own fairy pipes." And so it was, for at once the whirlwind of dust swept on to the hill of the fairy rath, and the hurling ground was left clear for the game to go on again in safety. It must be acknowledged that the fairies are a little selfish, or they would not have interfered with the great national sport of hurling, which is the favorite amusement of the country, and used to be held as a high festival, and arranged with all the ceremonial of a tournament, at least before the bad times destroyed all the fun and frolic of the peasant life. The prettiest girl of the village was chosen as the hurling girl, the Colleen Belalia. Dressed in white and accompanied by her maidens, she proceeded to the hurling ground, the piper and fiddlers going before her, playing gay dancing tunes. There she was met with a procession of young men surrounding the chief hurler, always a stalwart youth over 6 feet. And the youth and the maiden joined hands and began to dance, all the people cheering. This was called the opening of the hurling, and for the next match another pair would be selected, each village girl anxiously hoping to be the Colleen Belia. I know I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. I am so terribly sorry. The Colleen chosen to lead the ceremonial dance for the second or following games. Naturally, the hurling tournament ended with a festive supper, much love-making, and many subsequent marriages between the pretty Colleens and stalwart young hurlers, despite all the envy and jealousy of the fairies, who maliciously tried to mar the pleasures of the festival. I am trying to remember just what hurling is, and if it is as I remember, I must agree with the fairies in not appreciating the sport, but to each their own. The next story is called The Ride with the Fairies, once again with no attributions affiliated with this story. The fairies take great delight in horsemanship and are splendid riders. Many fine young men are enticed to ride with them. When they dash along with the fairies like the wind, Vara himself leading, on his great black horse with red nostrils that looked like flames of fire. And ever after the young men are the most fearless riders in the country, so the people know that once they have hunted with the fairies. And after the hunt, some favorite of the party is taken to a magnificent supper in the fairy palace. And when he has drunk of the wet wine, they lull him to sleep with soft music. But never again can he find the fairy palace, and he looks in vain for the handsome horseman on his fine black steed, with all the gay young huntsmen in their green velvet dresses, who rushed over the field with him. Like a flash of the storm wind, they have passed away forever from his vision, like a dream of the night. Once on a time a gentleman, also one of the Kirwans of Galloway, was riding by the fairy hill, where all the fairies of the west hold their councils and meetings, under the rule of Finvara the king, when a strange horseman, mounted on a fiery black steed, suddenly appeared. But as the stranger bid him the time of day with distinguished grace, Mr. Kirwan returned his greeting courteously, and they rode together, side by side, discoursing pleasantly. For the stranger seemed to know everyone and everything, though Mr. Kirwan could not remember having ever seen him before. "Now," said the black horseman, "I know that you are to be at the races tomorrow, so just let me give you a hint. If you wish to be certain of winning, allow me to send you my man to ride your horse. He never failed in a race yet, and he shall be with you early, before the start." With that, at a turn of the road, the stranger disappeared, for he was no other than Finvara himself, who had a friendly liking for the tribe of the Kirwans, because all the men were generous who came of the blood, and all the women handsome. Next morning, as Mr. Kirwan was setting out for a race, his groom told him that a young jockey was waiting to see him. He was the strangest looking little imp, Mr. Kirwan thought, he had ever set eyes on, but he felt compelled to give him all the rights and power that was necessary for the race, and the young imp was off in a moment, like a flash of lightning. Mr. Kirwan knew no more. He seemed like one in a dream, till the silver cup was handed to him as winner of the race, and congratulations poured down on him, and everyone asked eagerly where he got the wonderful jockey who seemed to make the horse fly like the spirit of the wind itself. But the jockey, by this time, had disappeared. However, the stranger on the black horse was there, and he constrained Mr. Kirwan to come with him to dinner, and they rode on pleasantly as before, till they reached a grand, beautiful house, with a crowd of gorgeous servants waiting on the steps to receive the lord and master and his guest. One of them led Mr. Kirwan to his room to dress for dinner, and there he found a costly suit of violet velvet ready, in which the valet arrayed him. Then he entered the dining hall. It was all lit up splendidly, and there were garlands of flowers twining round crystal columns, and golden cups set with jewels for the wine, and golden dishes. The host seemed an accomplished man of the world, and did the honors with perfect grace. Conversation flowed freely, while soft music was heard at intervals from invisible players, and Mr. Kirwan could not resist the charm and beauty of the scene, nor the bright red wine that his host poured out for him into the jeweled cups. Then, when the banquet was over, a great crowd of ladies and gentlemen came in and danced to sweet, low music. And they circled round the guest and tried to draw him into the dance. But when he looked at them, it seemed to him that they were all the dead he had once known. For his own brother was there, that had been drowned in the lake a year before, and a man who had been killed by a fall when hunting, and others whose faces he knew well, and they were all pale as death, but their eyes burned like coals of fire. And as he looked and wondered, a lovely lady came over to him, wearing a necklace of pearls, and she clasped his wrist with her little hand and tried to draw him into the circle. "Dance with me," she whispered. "Dance with me again. Look at me, for you once loved me." And when he looked at her, he knew that she was dead, and the clasp of her hand was like a ring of fire round his wrist, and he drew back in terror, for he saw that she was a beautiful girl he had loved in his youth, and to whom he had given a necklace of pearls, but who died before he could make her his bride. Then his heart sank with fear and dread, and he said to his host, "Take me from this place. I know the dancers. They are dead. Why have you brought them up from their graves?" But the host only laughed and said, "You must take more wine to keep up your courage." And he poured him out a goblet of wine redder than rubies. And when he drank it, all the pageant and the music and the crowd faded away from before his eyes, and he fell into a profound sleep, and knew no more till he found himself at home, laid on his bed. And the servant told him that a strange horseman had accompanied him to the door late in the night, who had charged them to lay the master gently in his bed, and by no means to awake him till noon next day, for he was weary after the race. And he bade them to take the hunter to the stables and tend him carefully, for the animal was covered with foam and all trembling. At noon Mr. Kirwan awoke and rose up as well as ever. But of all the fairy revels, nothing remained to him but the mark round his wrist, with the clasp of a woman's hand that seemed burned into his flesh. So he knew the night's adventure was no mere dream of the fancy, and the mark of the dead hand remained on him till his last hour, and the form of the young girl with the necklace of pearls often came before him in a vision of the night, but he never visited the fairy palace and never saw the dark horseman any more. As to the silver cup, he flung it into the lake, for he thought it had come to him by devil's magic, and would bring no good luck to him or to his race. So it sank beneath the waves, and the silver cup was seen no more. Ah, hello, Rodo. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hydration break. Ah, thank you so much, Rodo, for the compliment. I am quite pleased with my masquerade attire. I was quite proud of its making. Up next, we have the story of the fairy spy. Once again, not attributed to anyone. Yes, that gift was a gift given to me by someone whose name is escaping me at the moment, I'm afraid. But I will credit them once I update all of my information. As I'm always so greatly appreciative of any gifts given to me. But the fairy spy. Sometimes the fairies appear like old men and women, and thus gain admission to houses that they may watch and spy, and bewitch the butter, and abduct the children, and carry off the young girls for fairy brides. There was a man in the West who was bedridden for 7 years, and could do no work, and had to be lifted by others as he moved. Yet the amount of food he consumed was enormous, and as everyone pitied him, people were constantly bringing him all sorts of good things. And he ate up everything, but grew no stronger. Now, on Sundays, when the family went to Mass, they locked him up, but left him plenty of food, for there was no one in the house to help him. One Sunday, however, they left chapel earlier than usual, and as they were going by the shores, they saw a great crowd of strangers hurling, and in the midst of them, hurling and running and leaping, was the sick man, as well and jolly as ever a man could be. They called out to him, on which he turned round to face him, but that instant he disappeared. So the family hastened home, unlocked the door, and went straight up to the room, where they found the man in bed as usual, thin and weak and unable to move, that he had eaten up all the food, and was now crying out for more. On this the family grew very angry and cried, "You have been deceiving us. You are in league with the witch folk." but we'll soon see that you really are. For if you don't get up and out of that bed at once, we'll make down a fire and lay you on it, and make you walk." Then he cried and roared, but they seized him and dragged him to the fire. So when he saw they were earnest, he jumped up and rushed to the door. But before they could touch him, he had disappeared, and was seen no more. Now indeed they knew that he was in league with the devil, and they burned his bed and everything belonging to him, and poured holy water on the room. And when all was burned, nothing remained but a black stone with a strange signs on it. And by this, no doubt, he performed his enchantments. And the people were afraid of it, and gave it to the priest, who has it to this day. So there can be no doubt as to the truth of this story. And the priest knows the hidden meaning of the strange signs, which give people power to the stone, but reveal the secret to no one, lest the people might try to work devil's magic with it, and unlawful spells by the power of the stone and the power of the signs. I wonder if it was a rune stone of sorts. I believe I will read to y'all one more story, and then I think I will try to bring up a public domain old horror story. I'm thinking the original Nosferatu might be a fun little movie to watch with all of you. But that is still to be seen. The Dark Horseman. One day a fine, handsome young fellow called Jimmy Nolan set off to walk to the fair at Slane, whither some cattle of his had been set off for sale that same morning early, and he was dressed in his best clothes, spruce and neat, and not one in all the country road round could equal Jimmy Nolan for height, strength, or good looks. So he went along quite gay and merry in himself, till he came to a lonely bit of the road, where neither a soul was to be seen. But just then the sky became black dark, as if the thunder were in the air, and he suddenly heard the tramp of a horse behind him. On turning round, and he saw a very dark, elegant-looking gentleman, mounted on a black horse, riding swiftly toward him. "Jimmy Nolan," said the dark horseman, "I've been looking for you all along the road. Get up now quickly behind me, and I'll carry you in no time to the great fair of Slane, for indeed I am going there myself, and it would be very pleasant to have your company." "Thank your honor kindly," said Jimmy, "but it's not for the likes of me to ride with your lordship, so I would rather walk, if it's pleasing to your honor, but thanks all the same." Truth to tell, Jimmy, in his own mind, had a fear of the strange gentleman and his black horse, and distrusted them both, for he had not heard the people tell stories of how young men have been carried off by the fairies and held prisoners by their enchantments deep down in the hearts of the hills under the earth, where never a mortal could see them again or know their fate. And they were only allowed to come up and see their kindred on the nights the dead walked. And then they walked with them as they rose from their graves. So again he began to make excuses, meanwhile kept looking round for some path by which he could escape if possible. "Come now," said the dark horseman. "This is all nonsense, Jimmy Nolan. You really must come with me." And with that he stooped down and touched him lightly on the shoulder with his whip. And in an instant Jimmy found himself seated on the horse and galloping away like the wind with the dark horseman. And they never stopped nor stayed till they came to a great castle in the wood, where a whole set of servants in green and gold were waiting on the steps to receive them. They were the smallest people Jimmy had ever seen in his life, but he made no remark, for they were very civil and crowded round to know what they could do for him. "Take him to a room and let him dress," said the gentleman who appeared to own the castle. And in the room Jimmy found a beautiful suit of velvet and a cap and feather, and when the little servants had dressed him, they led him to the large hall that was all lit up and hung with garlands of flowers. And the music and dancing were going on, and many lovely ladies were present, but not one in the hall was handsomer than Jimmy Nolan in his velvet suit with cap and feather. "Will you dance with me, Jimmy Nolan?" said one lovely lady. "No, Jimmy, you must dance with me," said another. And they've all fought for him, so he danced with them all, one after the other, the whole night through, till he was dead tired and longed to lay down and sleep. "Take Jimmy Nolan to his room and put him to bed," said the gentleman to a red-haired man. "But first he must tell me a story." "I have no story, your honor," said Jimmy, "for I am not book-learned, but I am very tired. Let me lay down and sleep." "Sleep, indeed," said the gentleman. "Not if I can help it. Here, Davy," and he called the red-haired man. "Take Jimmy Nolan and put him out. He can tell no story. I will have no one here who can't tell me a story. Put him out. He is not worth his supper." So the red-haired man thrust Jimmy out of the castle gate, and he was just settling himself to sleep on a bench outside when 3 men came by bearing a coffin. "Oh ho, Jimmy Nolan," they said. "You are welcome. We just wanted a 4th man to carry the coffin." And they made him get under it with them. And away they marched over hedge and ditch and field and bog, through briars and thorns, till they reached an old churchyard in the valley. and then they stopped. "Who will dig a grave?" said one. "Let us draw lots," said another, and the lot fell on Jimmy. So they gave him a spade, and he worked and worked till the grave was dug broad and deep. "This is not the right place for a grave at all," said the leader of the party when the grave was finished. "I'll have no one buried in this spot, for the bones of my father rest here." So they had to take up the coffin again and carry it on over field and bog till they reached another churchyard, where Jimmy was obliged to dig a second grave, and when it was finished the leader cried out, "Who shall we place in the coffin?" And another voice answered, "We need draw no lots. Lay Jimmy Nolan in the coffin." And the men seized hold of him and tried to cast him to the ground, but Jimmy was strong and powerful and fought them all. Still, they would not let go of their hold, though he dealt them such blows as would have killed any other men. At last he felt faint, for he had no weapon to fight with, and his strength was going. Then he saw that the leader carried a hazel switch in his hand, and he knew that a hazel switch brought luck, so he made a sudden spring and seized it, and whirled it 3 times round his head, and struck right and left at his assailants, when a strange and wondrous thing happened. For the 3 men who were ready to kill him all fell down at once at the ground, and remained there as still as the dead. And the coffin stood white in the moonlight by itself, and no hand touched it, and no voice spoke. But Jimmy never waited to look or think, for the fear of the men on him, lest they should rise up again. So away he fled, still holding the hazel twig in his hand, and ran on over field and bog, through briars and thorns, till he found himself again at the castle gate. Then all the grand servants came out, and the little men, and they said, "You are welcome, Jimmy Nolan. Come in, his lordship is waiting for you." And they brought him to a room where the lord was laying on a velvet couch, and he said, "Now, young man, tell me a story, for no one in my castle is allowed to eat, drink, or sleep till they have related something wonderful that has happened to them." "Then, my lord," said Jimmy, "I shall tell you the most wonderful of stories, and very proud I am to be able to amuse your lordship." So he told him the story of the 3 men in the coffin, and the lord was so pleased that he ordered the servants to bring the youth a fine supper, the best of the wine, and Jimmy ate like a prince from golden dishes, and drank from crystal cups of wine, and had the best of everything. But after the supper he felt rather queer and dazed-like, and fell down on the ground asleep like one dead. Thank you so much, Rodo, for stopping by. After that, he knew nothing till he awoke next morning and found himself laying under a haystack in his own field, and all of his beautiful clothes were gone. The velvet suit and the cap and feather that he had looked so handsome in at the dance, when all the fine ladies fell in love with him. Nothing was left to him of the night's adventure save the hazel twig, which he still had held firmly in his hand. And a very sad and downhearted man was Jimmy Nolan that day, especially when the herd came to tell him that none of the cattle were sold at the fair, for the men were waiting for the master and wondering why he did not come look after his money. After all, the other farmers were selling their stock at the finest prices. And Jimmy Nolan has never yet made out why the fairies played him such a malicious and ill turn as to prevent him selling his cattle. But if ever again he meets a dark stranger on a black horse, he is determined to try the strength of his chalet on his head, ever if such a grand man among the fairies. Were he ever such a grand man among the fairies, or at least he might have left him the velvet suit, and it was a shabby thing to take it away just when he couldn't help himself, and had fallen down from fair weakness and exhaustion after all of the dancing, and the wine he drank at the supper, and the lovely ladies poured it out for him with their little hands covered with jewels. It was truly a bad and shabby trick, as Jimmy said to himself that May morning, whenever he stood up from under the hayrick, and just shows us never to trust the fairies, for with all their sweet words and pleasant ways, and bright red wine, they are full of malice and envy and deceit, and are always ready to ruin a poor fellow, and then laugh at him just for fun, and for the spite and jealousy they have against the human race. Of course, that is just the human perception of things. Now, let me see. Alright, so I would have been interested in streaming the public domain Nosferatu, but unfortunately it seems like I have some business to attend to. And so I'm afraid I must call this the end of this stream. Let me see if I can surprise someone. Well, of course, Mal. I'm sorry I cannot stream longer, but as said before, I have some business it seems I need to attend to that I didn't notice before. Perhaps tomorrow I can stream the public domain movie. But let us raid someone. It seems Chirpy Burby is still streaming. So let us give her a fun little hello. Seems like she is doing art right now. Alright, my dears, so let us use our glimmer to beguile and enchant them. And I thank you all so much for joining me today. You could be anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with me, and that truly means the world to me. So until tomorrow, we shall see you then. Goodbye, and thank you, my dears.